Whenever we had dinner at my future-in-law's, I would pass out in a bizarrely deep sleep. I would wake up with my blouse misbuttoned and my lipstick smeared, but my fiancé Malcolm just laughed it off as exhaustion. Then one evening, I hid a recording device under the sofa cushions and heard the terrifying truth. I heard the cold voice of my white brother-in-law Spencer telling someone to keep my head up because the facial recognition on my secure work laptop would not work if my eyes were closed. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to uncover the dark secrets of a toxic family. My name is Alicia. I am 30 years old and a forensic accountant specializing in corporate fraud. But no amount of professional training could have prepared me for the financial and emotional manipulation waiting for me in Bowie, Maryland. Growing up in a modest working-class neighborhood, I learned the value of a hard-earned dollar. I clawed my way through college, paid off my own student loans, and built a lucrative career tracking down missing millions for federal investigations. Malcolm Whitfield was supposed to be my safe harbor. He was the golden child of a prominent African-American family. His parents, Yvonne and Calvin, presented themselves as the pinnacle of Black excellence and old money in Maryland. Their sprawling estate, complete with a manicured lawn and a grand foyer, felt like a fortress of high society expectations. But beneath the designer clothes and the country club memberships, a different reality existed. A reality I was about to discover in the most degrading way possible. The Sunday dinners at the Whitfield mansion were a weekly ritual. We would gather around their massive mahogany dining table, sipping imported wine, while Yvonne subtly interrogated me about my salary and my modest upbringing. On this particular Sunday, the air felt unusually heavy. We had barely finished the main course when a sudden crushing wave of exhaustion washed over me. It was not the normal tiredness after a long work week. It was a heavy chemical fog that dragged my consciousness down into a dark pit. I remember Malcolm handing me a glass of water, his voice sounding oddly muffled, before the room spun and everything faded to black. I woke up shivering. The grand chandelier in the living room sent piercing shards of light into my heavy eyes. My mouth felt like it was stuffed with dry cotton, and a dull, throbbing pain echoed in the back of my skull. I tried to sit up, but my limbs felt like lead. As my vision slowly cleared, the first thing I noticed was the cold leather of the sofa against my bare skin. I looked down in absolute horror. The delicate pearl buttons of my silk chiffon blouse were fastened entirely wrong. The fabric was bunched up, leaving my collarbone and stomach completely exposed. I touched my face instinctively. The expensive matte lipstick I had applied so carefully before dinner was smeared across my cheek, completely ruining my makeup. My heart began to race, pounding violently against my ribs. Before I could even attempt to fix my clothes, a sharp, condescending voice cut through the silence of the living room. Well, look who decided to rejoin the land of the living. I turned my heavy head and saw my future mother-in-law, Yvonne, standing in the doorway. She was holding a crystal wine glass, her posture rigid, and her expression radiating pure disgust. She wore a tailored cashmere dress that probably cost more than my first car. I expected her to ask if I was feeling okay, or if I needed a doctor. Instead, she let out a dry, mocking laugh. Good Lord, Alicia. Is this the kind of trashy behavior you learned in your little working-class neighborhood? You look like a woman who just stumbled out of a cheap motel. I tried to speak, but my voice was barely a raspy whisper. I do not know what happened, I managed to say, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the tiny buttons of my blouse. I only had one glass of wine. Yvonne took a slow sip from her glass and rolled her eyes. Please save the excuses. You come into my beautiful home, embarrass my son in front of his family, and pass out on my custom Italian leather sofa like a common addict. I always told Malcolm that bringing a girl from your background into our circle was a mistake. We are the Whitfields. We have a reputation to maintain in this community. You parade around with your fancy forensic accountant title, pretending to be so smart and successful, but look at you now. You cannot even handle a simple family dinner without making a complete spectacle of yourself. Her words felt like slaps across the face, but my rising panic drowned out her insults. As I frantically tried to align the buttons of my blouse, a chilling sensation crawled down my spine. The silk fabric shifted, and I felt the sudden terrifying absence of tension across my back. I froze. My breathing hitched in my throat. I reached a shaky hand around my rib cage and felt the metal clasps. My bra strap had been completely unhooked. The realization hit me like a freight train. This was not just a wardrobe malfunction from tossing and turning in my sleep. Someone had deliberately undressed me while I was unconscious. My stomach churned with nausea and raw fear. I wanted to scream for Malcolm. I wanted to run out of that sprawling, suffocating house and never look back. But my muscles still refused to cooperate fully. I pulled my blouse tightly shut, clutching the fabric to my chest as tears of humiliation stung my eyes. I looked around the room wildly, trying to piece together the missing hours. The house was far too quiet. Where was Malcolm? Where was his sister Jasmine? Just as I opened my mouth to demand answers from Yvonne, the heavy oak door leading to the study slowly creaked open. Footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor. A tall figure stepped into the harsh light of the chandelier. It was Spencer, Jasmine's husband. My white brother-in-law stood there casually adjusting the cuffs of his expensive dress shirt. He looked down at me, his eyes trailing over my disheveled hair and my clutched blouse. Then a slow, sinister smirk spread across his face, a look so predatory and knowing that it made my blood run absolutely cold. Before Spencer could say a single word to me, Malcolm burst through the front door. He was out of breath and holding my heavy wool coat. He did not even look at his brother-in-law. Instead, he marched straight over to the sofa and grabbed my arm with a grip that was far too tight. "Come on, Alicia," he muttered, his voice tight, with an annoyance that felt entirely misplaced. "We are leaving right now. You have caused enough of a scene for one night." I stumbled as he pulled me to my feet. My legs felt like jelly, and my head throbbed with every step. I expected him to shield me from his mother and Spencer. I expected him to wrap his jacket around my exposed shoulders and ask me who had done this to me. But he did none of those things. He just dragged me toward the heavy oak doors of the mansion. I looked back over my shoulder and saw Yvonne and Spencer exchanging a look that I could not quite decipher. It was not anger or embarrassment. It looked almost like satisfaction. A cold, chilling satisfaction that made my stomach turn. The freezing night air hit my face as Malcolm shoved me into the passenger seat of his luxury sedan. He slammed the door and got into the driver's seat, starting the engine with an aggressive twist of the key. The drive out of the wealthy Bowie neighborhood was tense and suffocating. The silence in the car pressed against my ears like a physical weight. I sat there shivering, trying to fix the delicate pearl buttons on my blouse with trembling fingers. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of the past 2 hours. "Malcolm," I finally said, my voice breaking in the quiet car. "Someone took my clothes off. My bra is completely unhooked and my blouse was buttoned wrong. I did not do this. I only had half a glass of wine and then everything just went black. Someone in your house did this to me." Malcolm let out a loud, exasperated sigh. He gripped the leather steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned a stark white. He did not even turn his head to look at me. "Are you listening to yourself, Alicia?" He snapped, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are being completely ridiculous. You embarrassed my mother in her own home, and now you are trying to blame my family for your own sloppy behavior. You were exhausted before we even got there. You drank that heavy red wine on an empty stomach and you passed out." I shook my head frantically, feeling a fresh wave of tears prickling my eyes. "No, Malcolm, you do not understand. It was not normal exhaustion. I felt drugged. My body went completely numb. And even if I did pass out, why would I unhook my own bra in the middle of your parents' living room? Why would my lipstick be smeared all over my face?" "Because you were burning up," Malcolm replied smoothly, his tone shifting from angry to patronizingly calm. "You started sweating and complaining about the heat. You practically tore your own shirt open and unhooked your bra because you said you could not breathe. My mother tried to help you into the guest room, but you just collapsed on the sofa and refused to move." She was horrified, Alicia. "You have no idea how humiliating this is for me and my family." I stared at his profile illuminated by the passing amber streetlights. He was lying. I knew my own body. I knew I had not felt hot or claustrophobic. But the way he said it with such absolute unwavering certainty made a tiny seed of doubt plant itself in my brain. That is the thing about gaslighting. It does not just change the narrative, it makes you question your own sanity. You are a forensic accountant? Alicia Malcolm continued, his voice softening slightly into a tone of fake concern. You spend 12 hours a day hunting down corporate fraud and looking for criminals hiding money. You are stressed out and you are paranoid. You are starting to see conspiracies where there are none. Nobody in my family wants to hurt you. My mother is just strict about appearances, but she was worried sick when you started acting crazy. You need to stop bringing your work mentality into our relationship before you ruin us. I sat back against the cold leather seat, feeling a single tear slide down my cheek. He was using my career against me. He was using the very thing that made me strong, analytical, and observant to make me feel like I was losing my mind. The rest of the drive back to my apartment building was a blur of silent tears and suffocating confusion. I let him walk me up to my door, but when he leaned in to kiss me, I turned my head. I told him I needed to be alone. For once, he did not argue. He just sighed, told me to get some sleep, and walked away down the carpeted hallway. As soon as I heard this elevator ding, I slipped inside and locked my apartment door, throwing the deadbolt. I leaned against the cool wood and took a deep, shaky breath. The silence of my own home was usually a comfort, but tonight it felt heavy and dangerous. I walked into my bedroom and dropped my purse onto the mattress. I needed to call my best friend. I needed someone outside of that toxic bubble to tell me I was not crazy. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out my personal phone and my secure work smartphone. The work phone was a government-grade device issued by my firm. It held highly classified financial data, federal audit logs, and sensitive evidence for my ongoing investigations. It was practically a vault. I pressed the power button to wake the screen just to check my emails. My heart stopped completely. The screen was glowing a bright, harsh red. Bold white letters across the center of the display read, "Device temporarily locked due to 15 failed passcode attempts." I stopped breathing. The phone had a strict biometric lock. It required my face and a complex alphanumeric passcode to unlock. I had not touched this phone since I put it in my purse before arriving at the Whitfield mansion. 15 failed attempts meant someone had been desperately trying to break into my device while I was unconscious on that leather sofa. The pieces suddenly snapped together with terrifying clarity. This was not about me getting drunk. This was not about me embarrassing Yvonne. Malcolm was not just gaslighting me about a wardrobe malfunction to protect his mother from rumors. His family had deliberately drugged me to get to my federal audit files. And Spencer, standing over me adjusting his cuffs with that sinister smirk, was not just a creepy brother-in-law enjoying the view. He was the one trying to hack into my life. I stared at the glowing red warning on my phone screen, letting the sheer horror of the situation wash over me. If Spencer was trying to unlock my phone, he was definitely trying to get into my laptop too. My work computer was a heavy-duty encrypted machine that contained sensitive financial data for dozens of federal investigations. It was not just a breach of privacy, it was a federal crime. I walked over to my home office desk, my legs still feeling weak and shaky from whatever chemical was still lingering in my bloodstream. I pulled the heavy black laptop from my leather briefcase and set it firmly on the glass surface of my desk. My hands trembled as I pressed the power button. The screen illuminated, casting a pale blue light across the dark walls of my apartment. The biometric scanner flashed instantly, searching for my face. I sat up straight, taking a deep breath, and looking directly into the small camera lens. The system recognized me and prompted me for my 32-character alphanumeric passcode. I typed it in my fingers, flying across the keys with practiced speed, hoping against hope that my suspicions were wrong. But as soon as the secure desktop loaded, a massive yellow warning banner flashed across the top of the screen. Unauthorized biometric access attempt detected. The system log showed the event was timestamped at exactly 8:45 p.m. That was exactly when I was lying unconscious on the Whitfield family sofa. I opened the detailed security log and read through the data. The alert detailed that there had been multiple continuous attempts to scan a face, but the system rejected every single one of them because the subject's eyes were closed. The federal security protocols on my machine require a living conscious retina to grant access to the hard drive. Spencer had literally held my unconscious head up to my computer screen, trying to force his way into my audit files by using my sleeping face. The sickening reality of it made my stomach heave and my throat go dry. They had violated my body and my professional integrity in one fell swoop. Why did they need into my files so desperately? I was currently auditing several massive corporate accounts for the federal government, but I had not touched anything related to the Whitfield family real estate business. Or had I? I needed to know how they managed to incapacitate me so thoroughly before I could even begin to untangle their financial motives. I sat back in my ergonomic desk chair and closed my eyes, replaying the entire evening in my head, minute by painful minute. I had one glass of water when we arrived. Malcolm poured that from a sealed crystal pitcher on the dining table. Then we sat down for the formal dinner. Yvonne had prepared a lavish multi-course meal, as she always did, to show off her domestic perfection. The appetizer was a rich, creamy wild mushroom soup. I remembered how Yvonne had personally brought my bowl out from the kitchen, holding it carefully with both hands. She did not let the caterers serve me. She had hovered over my chair, watching with that tight, fake smile until I took the first few spoonfuls. She did not serve anyone else that way. She claimed it was a special family recipe she wanted me to try because she knew I loved mushrooms. Within 20 minutes of eating that soup, my vision had started to blur, the edges of the room softening before my limbs felt like solid lead. Yvonne had drugged me in her own dining room, surrounded by her wealthy, influential family. Anger, hot and sharp, began to replace the lingering fear in my chest. I was a forensic accountant. My entire career was built on finding the absolute truth when powerful, arrogant people tried to bury it. I tracked down offshore accounts, shell companies, and invisible money trails for a living. I ripped apart the polished facades of corrupt executives and handed them over to the authorities. If the Whitfield family thought they could drug me, assault me, and hack into my federal files without consequence, they had picked the absolutely wrong woman to mess with. But I knew better than to confront them without hard, undeniable evidence. Malcolm had already proven how easily he could twist the truth and gaslight me into doubting my own sanity. If I went to the police now, it would be my word against one of the most prominent Black families in Maryland. I needed proof that could not be denied, deleted, or explained away by their expensive lawyers. I opened a secure encrypted browser window and navigated to a specialty surveillance equipment website I sometimes used when dealing with corporate espionage cases. I needed something incredibly discreet, something they would never notice, even if they were standing right in front of me. I scrolled through the extensive inventory of spy gear until I found exactly what I was looking for. It was a microscopic high-definition camera and audio recorder perfectly disguised as a standard white pearl blouse button. It was nearly identical to the buttons on the expensive silk blouses I wore to the Whitfield dinners every Sunday to meet their absurd dress code. It had enough internal solid-state memory to record hours of high-definition footage and a battery life that could easily outlast any tedious family gathering. I paid for expedited overnight shipping using a prepaid untraceable credit card to ensure the purchase could never be linked back to me. Over the next few days, I played my part perfectly. I texted Malcolm the next morning, apologizing profusely for ruining the evening and blaming my stressful workload, just like he had suggested during that awful car ride. I acted like the compliant, exhausted girlfriend he wanted me to be, swallowing my pride to maintain the illusion of my ignorance. By Thursday afternoon, my surveillance button had arrived in a discreet padded envelope. I spent the evening carefully sewing it onto the collar of my favorite white silk blouse. I spent hours testing the camera feed on my personal phone, adjusting the angle to ensure it was absolutely perfect. It captured everything clearly, and the highly sensitive microphone picked up even the faintest whispers from across my living room. I was ready. Friday evening, I was sitting on my couch reviewing some encrypted audit files when my phone vibrated loudly against the glass coffee table. It was a text message from Malcolm. The screen lit up with his name, and I felt a cold knot form in my stomach as I read the words. Hey babe, my parents are hosting a casual family barbecue this coming Sunday afternoon. My dad was wondering if you could bring your work laptop along. He has some complex business numbers he wants you to help him run for the real estate firm. I stared at the glowing text message, feeling a dark, satisfied smile slowly spread across my face. They were getting desperate, and their desperation was going to be their absolute undoing. They thought I was just a naive working-class girl they could use and throw away. I typed a quick, cheerful response telling him I would be more than happy to help his father with the numbers and hit send. The trap was set, and I was ready to watch them walk right into it. Sunday arrived with a suffocating humidity that matched the heavy dread sitting in my stomach. The Whitfield family casual barbecue was exactly as pretentious as I expected. Their sprawling backyard had been transformed to look like an exclusive country club event, complete with white linen tents, a string quartet playing softly in the corner, and a hired catering staff weaving through the wealthy guests. Calvin stood near a massive stainless steel grill holding a glass of expensive bourbon, while a chef in a white coat did the actual cooking. Yvonne was holding court on the patio in a designer floral sundress, looking every bit the untouchable matriarch of Maryland high society. I walked through the wrought iron side gates, holding my heavy encrypted laptop in my left hand and carrying my purse on my right shoulder. I wore my favorite white silk blouse. It felt cool and light against my skin, but the microscopic camera button sewn securely near my collarbone felt like a heavy shield of armor. I had positioned it perfectly the night before, testing the angle multiple times to ensure it captured a wide, clear field of view of anyone standing over me. Malcolm spotted me and jogged over with a wide, perfect smile that did not reach his eyes. He kissed my cheek and immediately took the laptop from my hands, patting the reinforced casing like it was a prize. Good girl, he murmured, placing it carefully on a glass patio table out of the direct sunlight. Dad is going to be thrilled you brought this. He has some serious tax files he wants you to untangle for the real estate firm later. I just smiled weakly, playing the role of the eager, submissive girlfriend perfectly. As we walked toward the shaded seating area, Jasmine and her husband Spencer were lounging on a pristine white outdoor sofa. Jasmine looked me up and down, her eyes resting on my modest flats, before flicking up to my face with obvious disdain. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence, she drawled, taking a slow sip from her champagne flute. I am surprised you are not stuck in some dark cubicle today, Alicia. I know how you people who have to actually work for a living never get a day off. Spencer chuckled, leaning back and adjusting the sleeves of his crisp linen shirt. It must be exhausting having to build your own wealth from scratch without a family trust fund to fall back on, he added, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. Right, Alicia. I forced a polite, apologetic smile and reached up to casually adjust the collar of my blouse. With a single deliberate press of my index finger against the fake pearl, I activated the hidden device. A tiny, imperceptible vibration against my collarbone confirmed the camera was rolling. Every smug glance, every condescending remark, and every piece of their polished facade was now being recorded in high-definition audio and video straight to a secure cloud server. Malcolm walked over from the outdoor bar, carrying a brightly colored cocktail in a heavy crystal glass. Here, babe, he said, handing it to me. I had the bartender mix your favorite mango margarita. You look a little tense from the drive. This will help you relax before you have to look at those boring numbers with Dad. I took the glass from his hand, feeling the condensation drip down the sides. It smelled overwhelmingly sweet, with strong notes of citrus, designed perfectly to mask the bitter taste of whatever chemical they had crushed into it this time. Thank you, Malcolm, I said softly, looking him right in the eyes. The trap was officially set, and now I had to perform the role of my life. I brought the glass to my lips and tilted it back. I let the cold, sweet liquid pool in my mouth, but I kept my throat tightly closed, refusing to swallow a single drop. As Malcolm turned away to greet a family friend who had just walked into the yard, I quickly grabbed a thick, folded linen napkin from the hors d'oeuvres table. I brought the napkin to my mouth, pretending to delicately wipe my lips. In one swift, practiced motion, I spat the liquid directly into the highly absorbent fabric. I repeated this dangerous charade 3 times over the next 20 minutes. I would let the liquid touch my tongue, fake a swallow, and discreetly empty my mouth into the napkin whenever the family looked away. Slowly, the level of the margarita in my glass dropped until it was mostly just melting ice. Now it was time to sell the effects of their poison. I started by letting my eyelids droop heavily. When Calvin asked me a complex question about capital gains taxes, I slurred my words slightly and let my sentence trail off into absolute silence. I blinked slowly, shaking my head as if trying to clear a thick fog from my brain. Finally, I let my knees buckle just a fraction, swaying dangerously on the stone patio. Malcolm was by my side in an instant, his hands gripping my upper arms with that same bruising, controlling pressure from the week before. "Whoa there," he said loudly, ensuring the rest of the patio could hear his performance. "Looks like the summer heat and that tequila are hitting you a little too hard, Alicia." I let my head loll against his chest. "I just need to sit down for a minute," I mumbled, letting my words slur heavily together. He wrapped his arm tightly around my waist and guided me away from the bright sunlight and the chatter of the guests. We walked through the heavy sliding glass doors straight into the dim, quiet living room. It was the exact same room with the exact same custom Italian leather sofa. He laid me down gently against the cushions. I let my muscles go completely limp. I allowed my head to fall back against the armrest and my mouth to part slightly. I focused every ounce of my willpower on slowing my breathing, making my chest rise and fall in the deep rhythmic pattern of a drug-induced slumber. I kept my eyes completely shut, remaining perfectly still. For a few agonizing seconds, the muffled sounds of the backyard party drifted through the glass doors. Then I heard the heavy sliding doors click shut. I heard the distinct sound of a metal lock sliding into place. The friendly, casual banter of the family instantly died. The fake warmth evaporated completely. The silence in the living room became absolute and suffocating. The air itself seemed to drop 10 degrees. Then Yvonne's voice cut through the quiet. It was stripped of all its southern hospitality and motherly concern. It was sharp, cruel, and dripping with cold urgency. "Hurry up, strip her top off." I lay there completely frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs so violently I thought they would be able to see it beating through my skin. Footsteps approached the leather sofa, heavy and deliberate. I recognized the sharp click of Yvonne's designer heels and the heavy thud of Spencer's dress shoes. Then I felt rough hands grabbing the lapels of my white silk blouse. It was Jasmine. She did not even hesitate. Her fingers fumbled aggressively with the small pearl buttons, the very same buttons where my hidden camera was currently recording every second of their betrayal. "This is so degrading," Jasmine muttered, her breath smelling of expensive champagne. "Why do I have to do the dirty work? Why cannot Malcolm do it? Look at this cheap lingerie she is wearing. It is practically an insult to our furniture." Malcolm let out a stressed sigh from somewhere near the glass patio doors. "Because if she wakes up and sees me doing it, I cannot play the concerned boyfriend." He snapped, his voice completely devoid of the warmth he usually faked. "Just get it done, Jasmine. We are running out of time and the caterers are going to start wondering why the hosts are all locked inside the house." I felt the cool, conditioned air of the living room hit my bare chest as Jasmine forcefully yanked the sides of my blouse apart. She showed absolutely no care, pulling the fabric so hard I felt the delicate silk threads strain. Then I felt Spencer's large, cold hands reach around my back, fumbling clumsily with the clasp of my bra. A wave of pure, sickening nausea washed over me. It took every single ounce of my professional training and willpower to keep my breathing steady and my eyes firmly shut. The violation was horrific, but the high-definition audio and video recording I was capturing right now would be the ultimate nail in their collective coffins. "Be careful not to leave any bruises," Yvonne instructed coldly. "We need her to believe she just got overheated and stripped herself again. If she sees marks, she will go to the police and we will lose our only window into the federal database." "I got the laptop," Spencer announced, stepping away from the sofa. I heard the heavy thud of my encrypted machine being placed on the glass coffee table right in front of me. Dad said the federal auditors are scheduled to review the commercial property ledgers on Tuesday morning. He continued, his voice tight with rising panic. "If they see the phantom accounts, we are completely ruined." $5 million, Malcolm. $5 million of non-existent capital your father used to secure the loans for the downtown development project. When the feds realize the prestigious Whitfield real estate empire is nothing but a mountain of debt and fraudulent collateral, we are all going to federal prison. "Calm down," Spencer Yvonne commanded, her tone sharp and authoritative. "That is exactly why we brought her into this family. I always knew a working-class girl with a federal badge would be useful eventually. She is a senior forensic accountant with top-tier government clearance. Her biometric login grants backdoor access to the federal audit database. We just need to log in, wipe the red flag on our corporate tax identification number, and scramble the digital paper trail to point toward a dead-end shell company. By the time she wakes up and realizes what happened, the audit flag will be gone, and we will have the loans fully secured." I listened to their horrific confession echoing in the quiet living room. They were not just arrogant socialites looking down on my background. They were desperate white-collar criminals. The entire image of the perfect wealthy African-American family was a complete illusion built on $5 million of fraudulent bank loans and fake assets. And they were willing to drug me, assault me, and use my federal credentials to cover up their massive financial crimes. The sheer audacity of their plan was staggering, but it all made perfect twisted sense now. Malcolm had not pursued me because he loved my ambition. He pursued me because my career made me the perfect unwitting accomplice and the perfect scapegoat. I heard the distinctive mechanical click of my laptop screen being opened. Spencer let out a frustrated grunt. "It is asking for the biometric scan," he said, tapping his fingers impatiently against the keyboard. "The password alone is not enough to bypass the firewall. Malcolm, get over here and hold her steady so I can scan her face." I felt the sofa cushions sink as Malcolm sat down right beside my hips. The man who claimed to love me, the man who had bought me flowers and kissed my forehead just hours ago, was now actively participating in my assault. He slid his hands under my shoulders and propped my limp body up against his chest. His cologne, which I used to find so comforting, now smelled like cheap poison. He adjusted my head so it would not loll to the side. "Bring the laptop closer," Malcolm instructed, his voice entirely businesslike. "We only have a few tries before the system locks us out completely." The sound of the heavy laptop sliding across the glass table filled my ears. I kept my facial muscles completely relaxed, refusing to even twitch as I felt Spencer's presence looming right in front of my face. He smelled of nervous sweat and desperation. I could feel the heat radiating from his body as he leaned in closely. "All right, sweetheart," Spencer whispered maliciously right near my ear. "Time to go to work and save the family." He grabbed my chin with a hard, unforgiving grip. His thick fingers dug painfully into my jawbone as he forcefully tilted my head forward. I could feel the slight warmth radiating from the bright laptop screen against my skin. I knew exactly what was coming next, but I could not react. I had to remain the helpless, unconscious victim. The federal security system on my machine initialized. A cold, robotic system voice chimed through the laptop speakers, shattering the tense silence in the living room. "Retinal scan required. Please open eyes." "Damn it," Spencer hissed, slamming his hand against the glass table. "I cannot force her eyes open without her waking up, and the scanner needs to detect pupil dilation anyway. The system knows she is asleep." Malcolm let out a low groan of frustration, letting my head drop back onto the leather cushion. "What do we do now, Mom? The federal auditors are coming in 2 days. If we do not wipe that red flag, the entire company goes under." Yvonne paced across the hardwood floor, her heels clicking in a sharp, rhythmic pattern against the wood. "If we cannot break into the machine, we will just have to make her do it for us," she said, her voice completely devoid of any human empathy. "Jasmine, get your phone out. Turn the flash off so it does not startle her awake." I heard the rustle of expensive fabric as Jasmine pulled her smartphone from her pocket. "What are we doing, Mom?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly with nervous energy. We are securing our insurance policy, Yvonne replied coldly. Spencer, get on the sofa next to her. Unbutton your shirt a little and put your arm around her bare waist. Make it look intimate. A fresh wave of nausea washed over me, hitting me so hard I thought I might actually get sick. I wanted to violently shove them away and scream for the police, but I forced my muscles to remain entirely limp. This was the ultimate humiliation. I felt the sofa cushions dip heavily as my white brother-in-law climbed onto the leather right next to me. He smelled of nervous sweat, sour champagne, and expensive cologne. His large, warm hand slid around my waist, resting aggressively against my bare skin. I felt his chest press against my exposed shoulder, his weight pinning me down against the upholstery. Move your hand lower, Spencer. Yvonne instructed, her voice sounding like a twisted, demanding art director. Make it look like you two were caught right in the middle of a passionate, secret affair. Malcolm stepped out of the frame. We need it to look like she sneaked away from our lovely family barbecue to sleep with her sister-in-law's husband in the living room. I heard the faint electronic click of Jasmine's phone camera snapping picture after picture. Every single click was a physical blow to my dignity and a documentation of their utter depravity. They were fabricating a disgusting affair to destroy my reputation. In my world as a senior federal forensic accountant, integrity was absolutely everything. I held top security clearances. If photos of me seemingly drunk and half-naked with my fiancé's married brother leaked to my firm or to the tight-knit African-American community in Maryland, my career would be instantly over. I would be disgraced, disbarred, and ruined. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were going to hold these fabricated photos over my head and blackmail me into wiping their $5 million debt from the federal servers. I endured the sickening weight of Spencer's arm and his hot breath against my neck. I kept my breathing slow and steady, knowing that the tiny pearl button on my collar was silently capturing every word of their evil conspiracy. It recorded Yvonne's cold calculating commands, Jasmine's sickening compliance, and the complete cowardly silence of the man who had promised to marry me. Okay, that is enough, Jasmine said, stepping back and lowering her phone. I have at least 20 good shots. She looks completely wasted and he looks like he was just interrupted. It is perfect. Spencer quickly slid off the sofa, adjusting his belt and fixing his linen shirt. Good, he muttered, his voice tight with adrenaline. Now, when we tell her to erase the audit trail tomorrow morning, she will not have a choice. She will do exactly what we say to protect her precious, perfect career. I had captured all the evidence I needed to put every single one of them in a federal penitentiary. It was time to end this nightmare before they decided to go any further or try to move me. I let out a low, deliberate groan, letting my head roll slightly to the side, and slowly shifted my legs against the leather cushions. The reaction was instantaneous and completely chaotic. I heard the sharp intake of breath from Jasmine and the rapid scrambling of heavy feet as they scattered away from the sofa like cockroaches running from a sudden light. Spencer practically threw himself toward the glass patio doors, pretending to look outside at the party. Yvonne quickly smoothed her floral dress and grabbed a glossy magazine from the coffee table, flipping it open randomly. I fluttered my eyelids open, acting groggy and deeply disoriented. The bright overhead chandelier lights made me squint. I lifted my heavy head, looking around the room with feigned confusion. My gaze fell down to my chest. I let out a sharp gasp of manufactured horror, seeing my silk blouse pulled wide apart and my skin exposed. I scrambled to sit upright, my back hitting the armrest as I clutched the delicate silk fabric tightly against my collarbone. Malcolm rushed to my side, instantly slipping right back into his role as the concerned, loving boyfriend. "Hey, babe, you are awake," he said softly, reaching out to touch my bare shoulder. "You got really overheated out there and passed out on us. You practically tore your own shirt off trying to cool down." I looked at him, my eyes wide, with authentic panic over how easily he could lie right to my face. My hands trembled naturally as I fumbled to button my blouse over the hidden camera. "I did not do this." I stammered, my voice sounding raspy and weak, exactly like a woman waking up from being drugged. "I need to leave, Malcolm. I need to go home right now." "Of course, sweetie," Yvonne chimed in from across the room. Her voice was smooth and laced with that sickening, fake motherly concern she had perfected. "You clearly had way too much to drink in the afternoon heat. It is best you go sleep it off at home before you cause another scene." I did not look at her. I did not look at Spencer or Jasmine either. I focused entirely on buttoning my shirt and grabbing my heavy encrypted laptop from the glass coffee table. Malcolm tried to take it from me, offering to carry it to the car, but I pulled it fiercely out of his reach, hugging it tightly against my chest along with my purse. "I can carry it myself," I whispered, refusing to meet his lying eyes. "Just take me to my car." The walk back through the sprawling Whitfield mansion felt like a hazy blur. Malcolm guided me out the heavy front doors, leaving his toxic family behind in the living room. They probably thought they had won. They probably thought I was just a naive, embarrassed woman running away in deep shame. But as I walked out of that house and felt the cool evening air hit my face, I reached up and tightly gripped the tiny pearl button on my collar. It was still recording, and it held the sickening, undeniable truth about my fiancé's family. The car ride back to my apartment was buried in a heavy, suffocating silence. Malcolm kept glancing over at me, trying to read my expression, but I kept my face turned toward the passenger window. I watched the streetlights blur past, focusing all my energy on keeping my hands from shaking. When we finally pulled into my building parking garage, he insisted on walking me up to my door, playing the role of the devoted protector to absolute perfection. We rode the elevator in total silence. I stepped into my apartment and dropped my purse onto the kitchen island. Malcolm followed me inside, closing the heavy front door behind him and locking the deadbolt. He let out a long, dramatic sigh and ran his hands over his face, acting completely exhausted. "You really scared us today, Alicia," he said, his voice dripping with fake, gentle concern. "My mother was absolutely terrified when you just collapsed like that again. I really think you need to take some time off work, babe. This job is completely destroying your health and making you act crazy." I stood on the opposite side of the granite kitchen island, putting the solid block of stone between us. I looked at the man I had planned to marry. I looked at his handsome face, his expensive tailored clothes, and the soft, caring expression he wore like a cheap mask. The last lingering shred of love I had for him evaporated completely, replaced by a cold, burning fury. My apartment was my sanctuary. It was the home I had bought with my own hard-earned money from years of grueling forensic accounting work. And now his presence here felt like a toxic infection. I reached up to my collarbone. I gripped the small white pearl button and pulled it hard, snapping the heavy silk threads. I placed the tiny recording device onto the smooth granite surface. "What is that?" Malcolm asked, tilting his head slightly, pretending to be confused. I did not answer him. I pulled my personal smartphone from my pocket and opened the secure encrypted application linked to the camera. I turned the volume on my phone all the way up and pressed play. The pristine audio quality filled the quiet apartment. Yvonne's sharp, cold voice echoed off my kitchen walls, demanding that Jasmine strip my top off. Then Jasmine's complaining voice whining about my cheap lingerie. Then Malcolm's own voice snapping at his sister, telling her to hurry up because he could not play the concerned boyfriend if I woke up. The sickening audio of Spencer talking about using my retinal scan to erase their $5 million federal fraud played loud and clear. I watched his face closely, expecting to see panic. I expected his eyes to go wide with absolute terror. I expected him to fall to his knees, beg for forgiveness, or frantically try to grab the phone from my hands. I expected the reaction of a man who had just been caught committing a massive federal felony against the woman he supposedly loved. But Malcolm did none of those things. He stood completely still, listening to the recording of his family violating my unconscious body. As the audio played, Spencer's sick plan to use my face, the fake expression of concern on Malcolm's face, slowly melted away. It was replaced by a chilling, hollow emptiness. He reached up and casually loosened his expensive silk tie. Then, to my absolute horror, the corners of his mouth twitched upward into a slow, arrogant smirk. He walked away from the kitchen island and strolled over to my living room area. He sat down on my velvet accent chair, crossing his legs like he was attending a casual business meeting. He let out a low, dark chuckle that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up straight. "Well, I have to admit I am genuinely impressed, Alicia," he said, his voice entirely devoid of the warmth he had faked for the past 2 years. "My mother thought you were just a naive little number cruncher, but I told her you were sharp. I knew you would not just buy the whole overheating excuse twice. You actually bugged your own clothes. That is some serious federal agent level paranoia right there." I stared at him, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. "You are a monster, Malcolm," I whispered, my voice shaking with pure disgust. "Your entire family is disgusting. You drugged me. You let your white brother-in-law assault me and take pictures of my half-naked body. You tried to use my face to hack into a federal database to cover up your $5 million fraud. This recording is going straight to the FBI tomorrow morning. You and your parents are going to spend the rest of your pathetic lives in a federal penitentiary." Malcolm did not flinch. He leaned back in the chair, resting his elbows on the armrests and steepled his fingers together. He looked at me not with fear, but with a deep, patronizing pity. "You are smart, babe," he said softly, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "But you are always one step behind." He reached into his tailored pants pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He did not dial a number. He simply unlocked the screen, tapped a single contact, and brought the phone to his ear. He kept his dark, empty eyes locked entirely on mine. "She knows," he said into the receiver, his tone completely bored. "Come on up." He ended the call and tossed the phone onto my coffee table. "What did you just do?" I demanded, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. "Who did you just call Malcolm?" He just sat there, smiling that same chilling sociopathic smile. He looked at his expensive gold wristwatch and then looked toward the front door of my apartment. "You really thought I brought you back here to apologize, Alicia?" he asked mockingly. "You really thought we would let you walk out of that house with a laptop full of our financial secrets without having a backup plan? We own half of this city, sweetheart. We do not lose to girls who grew up clipping coupons in the suburbs." Before I could process his words, a loud, heavy knock echoed through my apartment. It was not a polite tap. It was an authoritative, demanding pounding on my front door. Malcolm stood up slowly and walked over to the entryway. He turned the deadbolt and pulled the door open wide. My blood ran completely cold. Stepping into my private sanctuary, violating the one space I thought was safe, was the entire Whitfield family. Calvin walked in first, his posture rigid and his expression dark. Yvonne followed close behind, her designer heels clicking sharply against my hardwood floors. Jasmine and Spencer trailed behind them, closing the heavy door and locking it securely. They did not look like criminals who had just been caught. They looked like absolute conquerors. They fanned out across my living room, staring at me with expressions of supreme, arrogant victory. I was entirely trapped in my own home, surrounded by the very monsters I had just exposed. Calvin stood by the door with his arms crossed over his chest, looking like a judge who had just handed down a death sentence. Yvonne stepped forward, her designer shoes clicking softly on the hardwood floor until she was standing right across the granite island from me. Jasmine and Spencer flanked her like two obedient foot soldiers. The smug expression on Jasmine's face made my blood boil, but I kept my posture rigid, refusing to show them the fear they so desperately wanted to see. Spencer reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He did not say a word. He just smiled that same sickening, predatory smile and tossed the envelope onto the smooth stone surface of the kitchen island. The flap fell open, and a stack of glossy photographs spilled out, spreading across the counter. I looked down and felt my breath catch in my throat. The images were incredibly high resolution and expertly framed. There I was, lying on their Italian leather sofa, with my silk blouse completely unbuttoned, exposing my chest and my bra. My head was tilted back, my eyes closed, in what looked like a state of absolute ecstasy. And right next to me, pressing his body intimately against mine, was Spencer. His shirt was partially unbuttoned, and his hand was resting low on my bare stomach. In one of the photos, he was leaning in, his lips hovering just an inch above my neck. If I did not know the horrifying truth behind how these pictures were taken, I would have believed the lie myself. It looked exactly like a passionate, illicit affair between a woman and her future brother-in-law, caught right in the heat of the moment. You take terrible pictures when you are drunk, Alicia Jasmine sneered, leaning against the counter. But I think the lighting is actually quite flattering. I looked up from the photos, my eyes locking onto Yvonne's cold, calculating stare. What do you want? I asked, my voice low and completely devoid of emotion. Yvonne placed both of her hands flat on the granite island, leaning in closer to me. We want what is best for the family, Alicia, she said smoothly. We built the Whitfield real estate empire from the ground up. We are a pillar of the African American elite in Maryland. We host charity galas, we sit on the boards of hospitals, and we have a reputation that is completely unblemished. But right now we have a small cash flow problem and a rather annoying federal auditor sniffing around our commercial development accounts. A small cash flow problem. I repeated, my tone dripping with absolute disbelief. You mean a $5 million fraudulent loan secured by phantom assets? Calvin stepped forward, his face turning a dark shade of angry red. Watch your mouth, little girl, he barked. You do not understand how business works at this level. We just need a bridge to get us through the next quarter. And that is exactly where you come in. Yvonne reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, stapled together with a blue backing. She slid them across the counter, stopping right next to the disgusting staged photographs. This is a guarantor agreement, Yvonne explained, her voice returning to that chilling, business-like calm. It legally binds you to the $5 million commercial debt. With your pristine credit score, your high federal salary, and your unblemished financial history, the bank will approve the extension immediately. And the audit? I asked, staring at the thick stack of papers. Spencer chimed in, tapping the granite with his knuckles. You use your senior forensic clearance to log into the federal database tomorrow morning. You find the red flag on the Whitfield corporate tax identification number, and you wipe it completely clean. You bury the trail so deep that no federal agent will ever be able to find it. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. And what happens if I tell you to get out of my apartment and go to hell? What happens if I refuse to sign away my life and commit a federal crime for a family of sociopaths? Malcolm finally walked over from the living room, standing right next to his mother. Then the photos go public, babe, he said casually. We send them to the senior partners at your forensic accounting firm. We send them to the elders at your church. We send them to every single contact in your professional network. You know how the Black elite community in Maryland works, Alicia. We protect our own, but we absolutely destroy outsiders who try to ruin our families. Yvonne nodded, her eyes gleaming with absolute malice. In the financial sector, integrity is everything. When the world sees these photos of you sleeping with your sister-in-law's white husband in our living room, your career will be instantly over. You will be fired, stripped of your federal clearances, and publicly disgraced. Nobody will ever hire you to balance a checkbook, let alone audit a major corporation. You will lose this beautiful apartment, and you will be right back in that poor little working-class neighborhood where you belong. The sheer weight of their threat pressed down on my chest like a physical block of concrete. They had planned this perfectly. They had me boxed into a corner with no obvious way out. If I fought back right now, they would hit send on those photos and destroy my life before I could even make it to a police station. I needed time. I needed to get them out of my apartment so I could execute a plan that would burn their entire empire to the absolute ground. So I did the only thing I could do. I gave them the performance of a lifetime. I let my shoulders slump forward. I let my breathing become rapid and shallow. I stared at the photos on the counter and forced a violent sob out of my throat. I let my knees buckle underneath me, collapsing onto the hardwood floor of my kitchen. I covered my face with both hands and started weeping loudly, letting the tears stream down my cheeks in a torrential flood of manufactured panic and defeat. Please, I begged, my voice cracking and trembling as I looked up at them from the floor. Please do not do this to me. I worked so hard for my career. I worked my entire life to get out of poverty. Please, Malcolm, you cannot let them do this. Malcolm looked down at me with an expression of supreme disgust. He did not offer his hand. He did not say a word of comfort. He just crossed his arms and watched me cry. I grabbed the edge of the granite counter, pulling myself up just enough to look Yvonne in the eyes. "I will do it." I sobbed heavily, letting my voice break. "I will sign the papers and I will clear the audit. But I cannot do it tomorrow morning." "Why not?" Calvin demanded, stepping forward aggressively. "Because the federal firewall is incredibly complex." I lied, forcing another massive sob out of my chest. "If I just delete the logs, the system will trigger an automatic security alert to the regional director. I have to build a backdoor script. I have to create phantom server pathways to make it look like a systemic glitch. It takes time. If I rush it, we all get caught. I need 3 days. Just give me 3 days to write the code and bypass the firewall safely." The room went completely silent except for the sound of my pathetic manufactured sobbing. I kept my head down, acting like a broken, defeated woman who had just lost everything. Yvonne looked at Calvin and then at Spencer. Spencer nodded slowly, acknowledging that the technical jargon I just made up sounded legitimate enough to be true. 3 days. Yvonne finally said, her voice echoing coldly in the kitchen. "We will host our 35th anniversary gala this coming Friday night. You will attend as Malcolm's loving fiancé. You will bring your laptop. You will sign the guarantor agreement in front of our lawyers, and you will initiate the audit wipe while we watch." I nodded frantically, wiping my nose with the back of my hand. "Yes," I promised, crying even harder. "Friday night. I will do it all on Friday night. Just please do not send those photos." Jasmine let out a cruel, condescending laugh. "Look at her mom. She is absolutely pathetic. I told you she was not strong enough to handle us." Yvonne picked up her designer tote bag and turned toward the door. "Get up off the floor, Alicia," she ordered, her tone dripping with absolute contempt. "You are embarrassing yourself. We will see you on Friday. Do not try anything stupid, or I will ruin your life before you can even blink." They filed out of my apartment one by one. Malcolm was the last to leave. He looked down at me, kneeling on the floor, and smirked. "See you Friday, babe," he whispered before pulling the heavy front door shut. The deadbolt clicked loudly, locking them out. I stayed on the floor for exactly 10 seconds, listening to their footsteps fade down the hallway. Then I stopped crying completely. I stood up, wiped my dry cheeks, and looked at the signed guarantor papers sitting on my counter. They thought they had broken me, but they had just given me exactly what I needed. I listened to the heavy silence of my empty apartment for a few more seconds, just to be absolutely sure they were gone. The moment I heard the distant ding of the elevator doors closing at the end of the hall, my tears stopped completely. My breathing slowed down, returning to a calm and steady rhythm. I stood up from the hardwood floor, brushing off the knees of my pants, and walked over to the bathroom sink to wash the fake distress from my face. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and smiled a cold and calculating smile. They thought they had backed a terrified animal into a corner, but they had actually just handed a loaded weapon to a trained sniper. I walked back to the kitchen island and picked up my heavy encrypted laptop. I carried it over to my home office desk and plugged it directly into my secure network terminal. Spencer was arrogant and he was incredibly sloppy. He thought he was a tech genius because he knew how to trade cryptocurrency and manipulate basic network firewalls. But he had fundamentally underestimated the machine he had been touching. My federal laptop was not just a storage device, it was a highly advanced security trap designed to catch corporate spies. When he held my face to the screen and tried to bypass the biometric scanner at the barbecue, the system did not just reject the attempt. It automatically activated a localized defense protocol. It silently scanned and recorded the media access control addresses of every single active Bluetooth and wireless device within a 10-foot radius. I opened my security logs and pulled up the raw data from Sunday afternoon. There were 3 distinct devices detected near my laptop during the time of the assault. One was Yvonne's smartwatch. One was Jasmine's phone, which she used to take those disgusting pictures. And the third was a high-end encrypted smartphone belonging to Spencer. By logging his unique device identifier, my system had effectively painted a digital tracking beacon right onto his back. I launched my forensic tracking software. It is a highly restricted network tool designed to trace financial cybercrimes by following digital footprints across secure servers around the world. I typed in Spencer's device identifier and hit execute. Lines of green code began to scroll rapidly across my black screen as the software hunted for his recent network activity. Since he had connected to the guest Wi-Fi network in my apartment during their little blackmail visit just moments ago, his device had unknowingly handed me his current external internet protocol address. I had a direct line straight into his digital life. I started pulling his browsing history, his encrypted messages, and his financial application data. I bypassed his flimsy consumer-grade firewalls in a matter of minutes, cutting through his security like a hot knife through butter. I expected to find endless files related to the $5 million Whitfield real estate fraud. I expected to see the fake loan applications, the inflated asset ledgers, and the desperate emails between him and Calvin trying to keep the sinking ship afloat. And I did find all of that. The Whitfield family business was a complete and utter disaster. They were leveraging properties they did not even own to borrow money from private lenders, creating a massive house of cards that was just weeks away from a spectacular collapse. But as I dug deeper into Spencer's personal financial folders, scanning through thousands of lines of code, I noticed something else, something completely separate from the real estate fraud. There was a highly encrypted hidden partition on his hard drive labeled with a random string of numbers. It took me nearly an hour to crack the encryption key using a brute force algorithm that taxed my laptop's processors to their absolute limit. When the folder finally unlocked, I leaned back in my chair and could not believe what I was looking at. It was a massive, meticulously organized ledger of wire transfers. Spencer had set up a dummy corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. Every week for the past 14 months, large sums of cash were being moved into this offshore account. We were talking tens of thousands of dollars at a time, secretly transferred through a complex web of decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges to completely wash the money and hide its origin. I leaned closer to the glowing screen, my eyes scanning the origin routing numbers. As a senior forensic accountant, I had memorized the routing prefixes for most major financial institutions and charitable organizations in the state of Maryland. I recognized the origin numbers immediately, but my brain struggled to process the sheer audacity and evil of what I was seeing. I ran a cross-reference check on the routing numbers through the federal banking database just to be absolutely certain there was no mistake. The result flashed on my screen, confirming my absolute worst suspicion. The money flowing into Spencer's offshore Cayman Islands account was not coming from the Whitfield real estate business. It was not coming from private lenders or corporate investors who had been duped. The money was being systematically siphoned directly from the Maryland Community Church Charity Fund, the exact same charity fund that Calvin and Yvonne publicly championed at every social event. The fund that was supposed to help underprivileged Black youth go to college and support struggling single mothers in our community. Spencer was not just helping his in-laws cover up a bad business loan. My white brother-in-law was actively embezzling millions of dollars from a vulnerable minority community and using his wife's powerful family name as a shield to get away with it. He was stealing from the very people the Whitfield family claimed to protect and uplift. And now I had the digital receipts to prove every single transaction. I sat there in the glow of my monitors, feeling a cold wave of absolute clarity wash over me. I needed to see exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. I ran a secondary trace on the Cayman Islands account following the money as it moved out of the dummy corporation. It did not sit there gathering interest in a traditional banking structure. Spencer was funneling the church donations into a series of highly volatile decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges. He was playing the role of a hotshot tech investor, but his trading history revealed a completely different story. He was reckless, arrogant, and entirely incompetent. I watched the digital ledgers load on my screen, tracking his aggressive leverage positions on obscure digital coins. I cross-referenced the dates of the wire transfers with the community events hosted by the church. The sickening pattern emerged instantly. In November, the church held a massive Thanksgiving fundraiser to build a new youth center. 2 days later, Spencer wired $300,000 to his offshore account. In April, the community gathered donations for a single mother's housing initiative. A week later, another $400,000 vanished into the Cayman Shell Company. He had taken the $2 million meant for scholarships, housing, and community grants and treated it like his own personal casino fund. He kept chasing his losses, doubling down on terrible trades, hoping to strike it rich and quietly return the principal before anyone at the church financial committee noticed. But the crypto market experienced a severe correction, and his highly leveraged positions were completely wiped out by margin calls. I accessed his final digital wallet using the backdoors left open by his sloppy network security. I stared at the balance on the screen. It was practically zero. The $2 million was entirely gone, vanished into the digital ether, leaving behind nothing but a trail of broken promises to a vulnerable community. The full picture of their desperation finally snapped into perfect focus. The Whitfield family and my smug white brother-in-law were tied together in a suffocating web of mutual destruction. If the federal auditors found the $5 million hole in Calvin's real estate firm, the ensuing investigation would inevitably tear open the family finances. That federal scrutiny would lead agents straight to Jasmine's joint accounts with Spencer, which would immediately expose the missing church funds. They were all going to fall together. They were not just trying to save a failing business. They were trying to save themselves from decades in federal prison. And they had decided that my career, my dignity, and my sanity were the acceptable sacrifices to keep their pathetic charade alive. I felt a dark, powerful energy replace the lingering trauma of the past few days. They had severely underestimated the woman they invited into their home. I am a senior forensic accountant for the federal government. I build airtight cases that take down international crime syndicates and billionaire tax evaders. Destroying a corrupt local family and their arrogant son-in-law was going to be effortless. I opened a new encrypted file directory on my desktop and began compiling the ultimate digital dossier. I named the folder Operation House of Cards. First, I downloaded the raw network logs proving Spencer used his device in my apartment during the blackmail attempt. This placed him at the scene of the extortion. Then I pulled every single wire transfer receipt showing the exact flow of stolen church funds from the Maryland Bank to the Cayman Islands and finally to the liquidated crypto wallets. I organized the data into a clear, undeniable timeline. I added the federal audit flags showing the Whitfields' fraudulent real estate loans and the phantom collateral they used to secure them. Finally, I uploaded the pristine audio and video files from the hidden camera on my silk blouse. The recordings of Yvonne coldly ordering my assault, the sound of Jasmine's camera snapping the blackmail photos, and Spencer's twisted confession about forcing my retinal scan. It was a masterpiece of undeniable evidence. No expensive defense lawyer in the country would be able to untangle them from this mess. But simply handing this over to the authorities in the morning was not enough. They had threatened to publicly destroy me in front of the entire African-American elite community. They wanted to humiliate me, ruin my professional reputation, and strip away everything I had built with my own hands. So I was going to give them exactly the kind of public spectacle they craved. I logged into my secure federal email portal. I drafted a message to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and carbon copied the lead investigator of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Division. I attached the encrypted dossier and provided the decryption key in the body of the text. I detailed the precise nature of the real estate fraud, the extortion, the physical assault, and the massive church embezzlement. I did not hit send. Instead, I opened the automated scheduling tool on my secure server. I set a dead man switch for the email to transmit automatically without any further input from me. I carefully selected the date for this coming Friday. I adjusted the time to exactly 8 p.m. Friday at 8 p.m. was the exact moment Calvin and Yvonne were scheduled to give their grand toast at their 35th anniversary gala. It was the moment they would be standing in the grand ballroom of their mansion, surrounded by hundreds of their wealthy friends, community leaders, and the very church elders Spencer had robbed blind. It was the moment they expected me to be hiding in a back room, quietly wiping their audit clean from the shadows, like an obedient, terrified little pawn. I sat back and watched the timer begin its silent countdown on my secondary monitor. I had 3 days to prepare my wardrobe, my fake smile, and my absolute compliance. I was going to walk into that mansion wearing the mask of a broken, defeated woman. I was going to look Malcolm in the eyes and tell him I loved him. I was going to let them think they had won right up until the very last second. I shut down my monitors and stood up from my desk, feeling lighter than I had in months. The Whitfield family had signed their own death warrants the moment they unbuttoned my blouse. Now all I had to do was show up to the party and watch them burn. The next morning I woke up early. I did not feel the exhaustion that usually followed a traumatic event. Instead, I felt a strange sense of absolute calm. The countdown to Friday night had officially begun. I made myself a cup of black coffee and sat by the window of my apartment watching the city below. I needed to make contact with Malcolm. If I stayed silent for too long, they might get suspicious, or worse, they might panic and leak those fabricated photos early. I had to feed their massive egos. I had to give them the exact reaction they expected from a woman whose entire life was hanging by a thread. I picked up my phone and stared at Malcolm's name on the screen. I took a deep breath, letting the air out slowly to steady my heart rate. Then I forced my shoulders to drop. I made my breathing shallow and erratic. I thought about the sheer violation of what they had done to me, letting a genuine tear prick the corner of my eye to make my voice sound wet and thick. I hit the call button and pressed the phone to my ear. He answered on the second ring. "Hello, Alicia," he said, his voice cool and entirely devoid of affection. "Malcolm," I whispered, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound completely broken. "Please do not hang up on me." "I am listening," he replied, sounding bored. "I have been awake all night." I continued, forcing a pathetic sob into my throat. "I cannot lose my career, Malcolm. It is all I have. I grew up with nothing, and I fought so hard to get where I am. You and your family, you have so much power. I know I cannot fight you. I know you will ruin me if I do not do exactly what you want." I heard a soft chuckle on the other end of the line. It was the sound of pure narcissistic victory. "I am glad you are finally seeing reality, babe," he said smoothly. "It makes things so much easier for everyone. Have you figured out how to bypass the federal firewall like you promised?" "Yes," I lied, my voice shaking. "I wrote the backdoor script. I can wipe the audit logs without triggering the regional director. I will sign the $5 million guarantor papers too. I will do whatever your mother wants. But Malcolm, I have one condition." His tone instantly hardened. "You are not in a position to make demands, Alicia." "It is not a demand," I pleaded quickly, acting terrified that he might hang up. "It is a request, a pledge. I want to sign the papers and do the transfer at the anniversary gala on Friday night. I want to do it in front of your parents and their lawyers." "Why would you want to do that?" he asked, sounding genuinely confused. "Because I need your mother to know that I am fully committed," I whimpered, playing perfectly into Yvonne's twisted need for dominance. "She thinks I am just some outsider who does not respect the family. If I do this in the dark, she will always hold those photos over my head. She will never trust me. I want to prove my loyalty. I want to show her that I am willing to sacrifice my own federal standing to protect the Whitfield name. I need her to see me as part of the family, Malcolm, so she will finally leave me alone." There was a long silence on the line. I could practically hear the gears turning in his arrogant mind. To a normal person, this request would sound insane. But to a family of raging narcissists who fed on control and public submission, it was the ultimate tribute. They loved the idea of bringing the proud, independent federal accountant to her knees in their own home. "You really want to kiss the ring that badly, huh?" Malcolm scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. "I just want to be safe," I whispered, letting another fake sob escape. "I want this nightmare to be over." All right, Alicia, he finally said, sounding incredibly pleased with himself. You can sign the papers in the private study during the gala. My father will have the lawyers present. Bring your laptop. You will wipe the federal audit logs right there on our network so we can verify it is done. And Alicia. Yes, I asked meekly. Wear something appropriate, he commanded. This is a black tie event celebrating 35 years of Whitfield excellence. Do not embarrass us looking like you bought your dress off a clearance rack. I will not, Malcolm, I promised softly. I will make sure everyone remembers exactly what I wore. He hung up the phone without another word. I lowered the device from my ear and wiped the single tear from my cheek. The pathetic trembling in my hands vanished instantly. I walked into my bedroom and opened my closet, pulling out a heavy garment bag I had purchased months ago for a charity event but never wore. I unzipped the bag and let the dark fabric fall away. The next 48 hours moved quickly. I spent my time finalizing the digital dossier, reviewing the network traces, and making absolutely sure the dead man switch on my secure email server was primed and ready. I did not hear from anyone in the Whitfield family again. They thought they had me completely leashed and trained. Friday evening finally arrived. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long dark shadows across my apartment. It was time to get ready. I took a long hot shower, washing away the lingering feeling of their hands on my skin. I dried my hair and pulled it back into a sleek, elegant style that meant absolute business. I applied my makeup with the precision of a soldier putting on war paint. A sharp, winged eyeliner, a flawless foundation, and a deep matte red lipstick that matched the exact shade of the dress hanging in my bedroom. I walked over to the dress and slipped it off the velvet hanger. It was a stunning floor-length crimson gown, tailored to fit my body perfectly. The deep red silk practically glowed in the dim lighting of my bedroom. It was bold, unapologetic, and impossible to ignore. It was not the dress of a defeated working-class girl begging for mercy. It was the dress of an executioner. I stepped into the gown and carefully pulled the zipper up my back. The heavy silk draped elegantly around my legs. I slipped my feet into a pair of expensive black stiletto heels. I walked over to my desk and picked up a small, sleek metallic flash drive. It contained every single file, every recording, every trace of the church embezzlement and the real estate fraud. It was the digital bomb that was going to level the Whitfield mansion. I dropped the encrypted USB drive into my black leather clutch right next to my phone. I picked up my heavy federal laptop, placing it securely in its reinforced carrying case. I took one last look at myself in the mirror. There was no fear left in my eyes. There was only a cold, sharp focus. I turned off the lights in my apartment, locked the front door, and walked toward the elevator. My destination was the Whitfield mansion, and I was about to give them an anniversary party they would never forget. The drive to the Whitfield estate took exactly 45 minutes. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my sedan, feeling the heavy weight of my federal laptop resting safely inside its case on the passenger seat. When I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates, I handed my keys to the young valet. He looked slightly surprised by my average daily commuter car, since the sweeping circular driveway was already lined with an absurd collection of high-end luxury vehicles. Mercedes-Benz's, pristine Range Rovers, and custom Bentleys gleamed perfectly under the warm amber security lights. I walked up the wide stone steps, taking a deep, steadying breath, and stepped through the heavy oak double doors. The grand foyer of the mansion had been completely transformed. The Whitfields had spared absolutely no expense for their 35th anniversary gala, treating it like a royal coronation. Massive floral arrangements of rare white orchids and deep red roses cascaded beautifully down the sweeping mahogany staircase. A live jazz band played soft, elegant music from the far corner of the main ballroom. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided effortlessly through the dense crowd, carrying polished silver trays of vintage champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with the absolute elite of Maryland Black high society. Prominent state politicians, wealthy real estate developers, and highly influential church leaders were all dressed in their finest evening wear. They were laughing and celebrating, completely oblivious to the fact that their generous hosts were secretly drowning in $5 million of fraudulent commercial debt. Malcolm was standing near the entrance to the main dining hall, holding a crystal glass of expensive bourbon. He wore a custom-tailored black tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, making him look every inch the successful heir to a real estate empire. When he saw me walk into the grand foyer, his eyes widened slightly. He took in the sight of my floor-length crimson silk gown and the cold, confident way I held my posture. For a brief second, I saw a genuine flicker of surprise and attraction on his face, but his massive narcissistic ego quickly swallowed it up. He walked over and wrapped his arm tightly around my waist, pulling me aggressively against his side. "You actually followed instructions for once," he whispered, his breath smelling heavily of dark liquor. "You look exactly like the perfect, obedient future wife tonight. Just make sure you keep that exact same submissive energy when we get into the private study later." I simply smiled up at him, allowing my eyes to remain wide and entirely compliant. "I will do everything your family needs me to do, Malcolm," I replied softly, my voice perfectly calm. Before he could say another arrogant word, Yvonne descended upon us like a hungry hawk spotting its prey. She wore a heavy gold sequined designer gown that caught every single beam of light from the massive crystal chandelier hanging above us. She looked like absolute royalty, and she demanded that everyone in the room treat her as such. "Ah, there is our little charity case," Yvonne announced loudly, ensuring that the surrounding wealthy guests could hear her clearly. She grabbed my upper arm with a grip that was entirely too tight, her long acrylic manicured nails digging painfully into my bare skin. "Come along, Alicia," she commanded, pulling me forcefully away from Malcolm. "I have some very important people you need to meet tonight." For the next agonizing hour, Yvonne dragged me across the crowded ballroom floor. She paraded me in front of wealthy private investors, local state senators, and the senior board members of her exclusive country club. Every single introduction was a carefully crafted public insult, designed specifically to highlight my working-class background while aggressively elevating her own supposed generosity. She introduced me to a prominent state judge by saying, "This is Malcolm's little girlfriend, Alicia. She comes from a very modest, struggling family in the public school district, but we have really taken her under our wing this year. We are paying for etiquette classes so she can eventually learn how to fit in with our proper social circle." She then introduced me to a wealthy plastic surgeon by whispering loudly that I used to clip grocery coupons just to survive before her successful son rescued me from a life of absolute mediocrity. She even had the audacity to introduce me to the senior pastor of her congregation, saying that I was a lost sheep from a broken home whom Malcolm had graciously guided toward the light. I endured every single humiliating introduction without breaking my polite fake smile. I bit my tongue so hard I could actually taste a faint metallic hint of blood in my mouth. I nodded respectfully to the wealthy guests, letting them look at me with their condescending pity. They all praised Yvonne for her incredible Christian charity and her boundless maternal grace. I just kept my hand tightly gripped around my black leather clutch, feeling the solid rectangular shape of the encrypted flash drive hidden safely inside. Across the crowded room, I spotted Jasmine and Spencer holding court near an extravagant swan ice sculpture. Jasmine wore a tight, silver sequined dress, laughing loudly at something another guest had said. Spencer was holding a fresh glass of dark liquor, looking incredibly smug in his fitted suit. He was actively shaking hands with the very church elders he had systematically robbed blind. He looked them dead in the eye, smiling warmly, while his offshore Cayman account sat completely empty after liquidating their $2 million community charity fund. I watched him playfully clink his glass against the head pastor's glass, pretending to be a devout pillar of the community. "Enjoy the champagne, Spencer," I thought to myself, keeping my polite smile frozen firmly on my face. "It is the last expensive drink you are ever going to have as a free man." I glanced up at the massive antique grandfather clock standing against the far wall of the ballroom. The heavy gold hands showed it was exactly 7:45. The automated dead man switch on my secure federal email server was scheduled to trigger in exactly 15 minutes. Malcolm suddenly appeared at my right side, grabbing my elbow firmly. He leaned in close, brushing his lips against my ear. "It is time, babe," he murmured, his voice dropping to a serious, cold, businesslike tone. "Dad and the legal team are waiting for you right now. Do not mess this up, or I swear those pictures go out to everyone in this room." He guided me away from the bright lights, the sparkling chandeliers, and the loud, joyful jazz music. We walked down a long, dimly lit hallway that was completely separated from the lavish party happening in the main reception rooms. The contrast between the joyful ballroom and this dark, secluded corridor was jarring. The air back here felt significantly colder and heavy with unspoken tension. Standing at the very end of the hallway, acting like a bouncer, was a tall man wearing a severe gray suit. It was Arthur, the senior family lawyer who had handled the Whitfield corporate accounts and covered up their dirty secrets for over a decade. He looked at me with cold, indifferent eyes before pushing open the heavy double doors leading into the private study. I stepped into the room, clutching my heavy federal laptop case tightly against my side. The study was lined with dark wood bookshelves from floor to ceiling and smelled strongly of expensive cigars. The only light in the room came from a green glass banker's lamp sitting on the desk, casting long, sinister shadows across the walls. Calvin was sitting directly behind a massive, polished mahogany desk, looking incredibly impatient and furious. The moment the heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind me, isolating us entirely from the rest of the mansion, Calvin reached forward. He placed his large hand flat on a thick stack of legal documents and aggressively slid the $5 million guarantor contract all the way across the smooth mahogany wood until it stopped right in front of me. I stared down at the thick stack of papers resting on the edge of the desk. The crisp white pages were printed with dense legal jargon detailing the massive $5 million commercial debt I was supposed to personally guarantee. Next to the contract, Calvin placed a heavy gold fountain pen. He tapped his thick index finger against the signature line, his face pulled into a tight, impatient scowl. "Sign it right now," Calvin ordered, his voice echoing harshly in the quiet study. "Arthur will notarize the signature, and then you will open that laptop of yours and clear the federal audit flags off our corporate accounts. We have a party to get back to, and I am not going to spend my entire anniversary night babysitting a paranoid little girl." Malcolm stood right behind me, his presence feeling like a heavy shadow pressing down on my shoulders. I heard the study doors open again. Yvonne stepped into the room with Spencer trailing closely behind her. She had a triumphant smirk on her face, looking down at the legal documents as if they were the ultimate prize. "Well, go on, Alicia," Yvonne sneered, folding her arms across her sequined chest. "You said you wanted to prove your loyalty to this family. Here is your chance. Pick up the pen and do exactly what you promised." I kept my hands firmly at my sides, refusing to reach for the gold pen. I let my breathing become rapid and shallow, acting like I was on the absolute verge of a massive panic attack. I looked at the dark wood-paneled walls of the secluded study and slowly shook my head. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling so much it barely carried across the desk. "I will not sign it in here." Calvin's face immediately turned a deep shade of furious red. He slammed his fist down onto the mahogany desk, making the heavy fountain pen jump. "What did you just say to me?" he roared, stepping around the side of the desk. "You think you have a choice in this. You think you can walk into my house and change the deal at the last minute." Malcolm grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. "Stop playing games, Alicia," he hissed angrily into my ear. "Sign the paper and wipe the drive, or I am sending the photos to your boss right this second." I shrank away from his grip, forcing hot tears to well up in my eyes. "I am not changing the deal," I cried out, letting my voice crack with manufactured terror. "I am going to sign the contract. I am going to clear the federal audit. But I will not do it hiding in this dark room like a shameful secret." Spencer let out a loud, exasperated sigh. "What difference does it make where you sign the stupid paper?" he asked, rolling his eyes. "Just write your name and get on the computer." "It makes all the difference in the world," I pleaded, looking directly at Yvonne. I know how you operate, Yvonne. If I sign this contract in secret behind closed doors, you will just use those photos to blackmail me again next month, and the month after that. You will never stop threatening me because you will never truly believe I am loyal to you. You will always see me as an outsider you have to control through fear. Yvonne narrowed her eyes, studying my tear-stained face with cold calculation. "And what exactly are you proposing?" she asked, her tone dripping with suspicion. "I want to sign the papers out there," I said, gesturing toward the heavy oak doors leading back to the grand ballroom. "I want to do it on the main stage in front of every single one of your wealthy friends, your private investors, and the church elders. When you go up to make your grand anniversary toast, I want Malcolm to bring me up there with you. You can tell everyone that I am officially joining the Whitfield Family Trust. You can tell them I am pledging my federal career and my financial future to support your real estate empire." I paused, taking a shaky breath to let the full weight of my proposal sink into their arrogant minds. If I sign away $5 million of my own credit on a public stage in front of the entire Maryland elite, I can never take it back. I continued, my voice thick with fake desperation. I can never claim I was coerced. I can never go to the police because the entire high society will be witnesses to my willing participation. It is the ultimate proof of my submission, Yvonne. It binds me to this family permanently, in the absolute brightest light possible. Give me the public humiliation I deserve, and promise me you will delete those photos forever. The private study descended into total silence. I could see the intense greed and overwhelming narcissism warring in Yvonne's eyes. Arthur, the family lawyer, stepped forward, adjusting his glasses nervously. "Calvin, this is highly irregular," he warned in a low voice. "We do not need a public spectacle for a private commercial guarantor contract. It is an unnecessary risk." But Yvonne held up her manicured hand, silencing the lawyer instantly. Her lips slowly curled into a wicked, deeply satisfied smile. She did not see a risk. She only saw the ultimate power trip. She saw the perfect opportunity to parade the broken independent woman in front of her entire social circle, completely cementing her dominance. "Arthur, you have absolutely no vision," Yvonne said, her voice practically purring with cruel delight. "It is actually a brilliant idea. What better way to celebrate 35 years of building our legacy than by having the senior federal accountant publicly pledge her entire life to our family business? It shows our investors that our company is so strong even the government wants a piece of it." She walked over to the desk and picked up the thick stack of legal documents along with the heavy gold pen. She turned to Malcolm, her eyes gleaming with absolute triumph. "Bring her to the stage," Malcolm, Yvonne commanded. "We are going to make our anniversary toast right now, and then our little charity case is going to sign her life away in front of everyone." Malcolm smirked, looking down at me as if I was the most pathetic creature he had ever seen. He wrapped his hand firmly around my lower back, a gesture that looked loving to the outside world, but felt like a vice grip pressing into my spine. He grabbed my laptop case with his other hand. "Let us go make you an official Whitfield babe," he whispered mockingly into my ear. Arthur quickly opened the heavy oak doors, and the loud, joyful sounds of the jazz band flooded back into the dark hallway. We walked out of the secluded corridor and back into the blinding light of the grand foyer. Yvonne and Calvin walked ahead of us looking like absolute royalty, preparing to address their adoring subjects. Spencer trailed behind them, adjusting his tie and looking incredibly smug. Malcolm escorted me through the dense crowd of wealthy guests. People parted ways for us, smiling and offering their congratulations to the beautiful couple. I kept my head bowed, acting like a completely defeated woman walking directly to the executioner's block. But inside, my heart was pounding with a fierce, unstoppable adrenaline. We reached the front of the massive ballroom, where a raised platform stage was set up behind a grand crystal podium. The jazz band slowly faded their music to a halt as Calvin and Yvonne stepped up to the microphones. The entire room of hundreds of elite guests fell completely silent, turning their collective attention toward the stage. Malcolm pushed me gently up the velvet stairs until I was standing right beside the podium. Hundreds of elite eyes locked onto the humble daughter-in-law standing in her crimson gown, clutching her black leather purse. I stood there looking out at the sea of wealthy faces illuminated by the bright chandeliers. The sheer scale of the event was overwhelming, but my heart beat with a steady rhythmic calm. Calvin stepped up to the grand crystal podium and tapped the microphone. The sharp electronic feedback echoed across the massive silent room, demanding everyone to pay absolute attention. "Welcome everyone to our 35th anniversary celebration," he began, his voice booming with that fake practiced warmth he used for public events. "Tonight is about honoring family tradition and building a legacy that will last for generations. We are so incredibly proud to announce that my son's future bride is officially joining the Whitfield Corporate Trust this evening. She is going to sign a commercial guarantee right here on this stage to prove her eternal devotion to our empire and to our family." The crowd erupted into polite applause. Wealthy investors and prominent politicians smiled up at us, completely unaware of the extortion happening right in front of their eyes. Calvin stepped back from the podium and gestured grandly for me to take his place. Malcolm nudged me forward, his heavy hand still pressing threateningly against my spine. I walked up to the microphone. I placed my heavy federal laptop onto the crystal podium right next to the thick stack of legal documents and the heavy gold pen. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I looked directly at Calvin and then at Yvonne, who was standing just a few feet away, radiating pure, arrogant victory. "Before I sign my life away," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the massive speakers, "I think we should display the commercial deeds on the projector behind us. I want everyone in Maryland to see exactly what kind of powerful assets the Whitfield family truly owns. I want to show the world the exact properties I am guaranteeing tonight." Calvin puffed out his chest, looking incredibly pleased with the idea of showing off his supposed wealth to his elite peers. He thought I was finally submitting completely and feeding his massive ego. He nodded aggressively to the audiovisual technician standing near the edge of the stage. The technician walked over quickly and handed me the high-definition display cable. I plugged it directly into the side of my laptop. The massive digital screen behind us, which had been rotating through tasteful family portraits and wedding photos, suddenly went black as it synced to my secure machine. I reached into my black leather clutch and pulled out the sleek metallic flash drive. My hands were completely steady. I inserted the drive into the USB port. I opened the encrypted folder I had prepared the night before. I ignored the $5 million contract resting on the podium. I dragged the mouse over the first file and double-clicked. The powerful projector illuminated the stage with a brilliant, blinding white light. The image flashed onto the 20-foot screen behind us in stunning high definition. It was not a commercial real estate deed or a bank ledger. It was the horrific photograph Jasmine had taken in the living room. It showed me lying completely limp on the Italian leather sofa, with my white silk blouse entirely unbuttoned, exposing my chest and my bra. It showed my white brother-in-law Spencer, pressing his body intimately against mine, his hand resting low on my bare stomach, while his lips hovered right next to my neck. The image was gigantic, grotesque, and utterly impossible to misinterpret. The reaction from the ballroom was instantaneous and absolutely explosive. A collective gasp of pure visceral horror rippled through the hundreds of elite guests. Someone near the front row dropped a crystal champagne flute, letting it shatter loudly against the polished marble floor. Prominent state politicians and wealthy real estate developers stared up at the massive screen with their mouths hanging wide open in sheer disbelief. The senior pastor of Yvonne Church, the very man who had praised her charity work earlier, covered his eyes and shook his head, stepping backward away from the stage. Down in the center of the crowd, I saw Spencer freeze completely. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost caught in headlights. Jasmine stood right next to him, looking up at her own twisted photography work being broadcast to the entire high society of Maryland. Her jaw dropped and her hands started shaking uncontrollably. On the stage, the flawless illusion of the perfect Whitfield family shattered into a million jagged pieces. Malcolm stumbled backward away from me, his eyes darting frantically from the disgusting image on the screen to my perfectly calm face. The reality of what was happening finally crashed into his arrogant brain. He reached out aggressively to grab my laptop, but I quickly shifted my body, blocking his access and bracing my weight against the heavy crystal podium. Yvonne let out a noise that sounded exactly like a wounded animal. The mask of the elegant, untouchable matriarch dissolved entirely. She lunged toward the podium, her heavy gold sequined gown catching the bright stage lights, making her look erratic and completely unhinged. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, her voice completely raw and stripped of all its fake southern charm. "Turn that screen off right now." But I was much faster than her. I grabbed the heavy metal microphone from its stand. I pulled it free and stepped away from the crystal podium, putting several feet of safe distance between myself and Yvonne's grasping manicured hands. I held the microphone close to my mouth, feeling a surge of absolute power flow through my veins. "Do not adjust your glasses, ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice echoing like thunder across the chaotic, panic-stricken ballroom. "What you are looking at is not a secret affair. It is a fabricated lie. It is a calculated blackmail photo carefully staged by the wonderful hosts of this anniversary gala." The crowd went dead silent again, hanging on to every single syllable I spoke. The jazz musicians had completely stopped playing. Yvonne froze on the center of the stage, staring at me with a mixture of absolute terror and murderous rage. Calvin was frozen right beside the podium, completely incapable of processing how his glorious moment of triumph had just turned into a brutal public execution. This beautiful family drugged me at their Sunday barbecue. I continued pacing slowly across the front of the stage so everyone could see the total lack of fear in my eyes. They waited until I was completely unconscious. Then they ripped my clothes off and forced their own son-in-law to climb on top of my paralyzed body so they could take this exact picture. They threatened to send this image to my federal employer and to every single person in this room unless I agreed to stand here tonight and sign a $5 million fraudulent commercial contract. Malcolm finally snapped out of his silent shock. "Shut your mouth, Alicia," he roared, stepping toward me with his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "She is lying," he yelled out desperately to the crowd, his voice cracking with pure panic. "She is a paranoid, crazy woman making things up to ruin our family because she is mentally unstable." Yvonne waved her arms frantically at the audiovisual technician standing paralyzed near the stairs. "Cut the power," she screamed at the top of her lungs, her face red and distorted. "Cut the main power to the stage right now, you idiot." The technician looked completely terrified, unsure of whose orders to follow in the midst of this wealthy family meltdown. But his hesitation did not matter at all. My laptop was running on its own internal battery, and I was in absolute complete control of the presentation. I turned my back to Malcolm and Yvonne, ignoring their pathetic screaming completely. I walked right up to my laptop, resting securely on the crystal podium. I did not even look at them as I reached out and firmly pressed the spacebar. The massive 20-foot screen flickered briefly. The horrific blackmail photograph disappeared. The grand ballroom went dark for a fraction of a second before the powerful projector lit up once again. The crystal-clear, high-definition hidden video captured by my blouse button began to play. The pristine audio feed piped directly through the main ballroom speakers, filling the completely silent room with the undeniable echoing sound of Yvonne's cold, cruel voice ordering them to strip my clothes off. The audio of Yvonne ordering the assault played on an endless loop in the minds of everyone present. I watched the faces of the Maryland elite contort into absolute revulsion. The prominent state judge who Yvonne had proudly introduced me to earlier actually turned his back and walked toward the exit, shaking his head in sheer disgust. Several wealthy investors who were supposed to be the financial backbone of the Whitfield real estate empire began whispering furiously to their spouses and assistants, pulling out their cell phones to immediately contact their own legal teams. They knew that if the Whitfields were committing fraud, their own investments were in critical danger. The pristine, untouchable reputation of the Whitfield family was actively disintegrating right in front of my eyes. Calvin stood completely frozen at the edge of the stage, his chest heaving as he realized his entire social and professional life was over. The grand legacy he had bragged about for 35 years was dead in a matter of minutes. I am a senior forensic accountant for the federal government, I said into the microphone, my voice slicing through the heavy murmurs of the crowd. I audit massive corporate accounts for fraud and financial crimes. The people standing on this stage did not drug me and assault me just because they are cruel. They did it because they are desperate criminals. The Whitfield real estate empire is nothing but a massive house of cards built on fake assets and phantom collateral. They are currently drowning in $5 million of fraudulent commercial debt. And the federal government is scheduled to audit their ledgers this coming Tuesday morning. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic frenzy of shocked gasps and angry muttering. I saw the senior pastor of the community church, the man who had blessed their family just an hour ago, step forward with a look of profound disappointment. Calvin tried to step up to the crystal podium to defend himself, but his legs seemed to give out. He gripped the edge of the clear acrylic stand, looking incredibly small and pathetic. He tried to speak into the microphone to claim it was all a massive misunderstanding, but his voice was completely drowned out by the sheer outrage radiating from his own guests. He had invited the most powerful people in the state to witness my humiliation, and instead he had assembled the perfect audience for his own spectacular destruction. The very people he relied on for status and power were now staring at him like he was a diseased animal. They knew I had the federal security clearance to wipe their audit logs clean. I continued pacing across the stage and looking directly down at the angry crowd. But they also knew I would never commit a felony for them, so they devised a plan to force my hand. They drugged my food at a family barbecue, waited until I passed out, and then staged that disgusting photograph with their white son-in-law. They brought me into a dark private study tonight and told me that if I did not sign a $5 million guarantor contract to save their sinking company, they would release that photo and destroy my career. They thought they could use my spotless reputation as a human shield to protect their criminal enterprise. They thought because I grew up without money, that I would be terrified of losing my status in this room. They were entirely wrong. Malcolm finally found his voice. He took a threatening step toward me, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred and unchecked aggression. "You are going to pay for this, Alicia," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "We will sue you for defamation. We will bury you in endless legal fees until you are back on the streets begging for scraps." But his threats meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. I just looked at him with cold, absolute indifference. "You cannot sue someone for telling the truth, Malcolm," I replied smoothly, holding my ground against his physical intimidation. "And you certainly cannot sue someone when you are sitting in a federal prison cell for extortion and corporate fraud." Yvonne was leaning heavily against the back wall of the stage, clutching her gold-sequined dress as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her breathing was ragged and her perfectly styled hair was coming undone. She looked at the wealthy women in the front row, the women she had spent decades trying to impress, control, and dominate. They were looking back at her with nothing but sheer contempt. The bougie high society she worshipped had officially rejected her. She was no longer the elegant, untouchable matriarch of Maryland. She was a desperate common criminal who had just been exposed as an abusive monster in front of hundreds of key witnesses. The utter humiliation in her eyes was the exact justice I had been waiting for. Suddenly, a shrill, piercing scream cut through the chaotic noise of the ballroom. "You are a liar, a completely psychotic liar." I looked down into the center of the crowd and saw Jasmine pushing her way to the front, shoving aside wealthy guests without a single apology. Her face was flushed bright red, and she was pointing a shaking, manicured finger directly at me. "My parents built this company from nothing," Jasmine shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the marble floors. "They are good Christian people. You are just a jealous, pathetic gold digger who wants to steal our money and ruin our good name. Spencer did nothing wrong. We all just wanted to help you, and this is how you repay us." The crowd parted around Jasmine, leaving her standing completely alone near the edge of the stage. Spencer was standing several feet behind her, his face completely drained of color and covered in a slick sheen of nervous sweat. He was not trying to comfort his wife or defend his new family. He was slowly backing away toward the grand foyer, looking exactly like a cornered rat trying to escape a sinking ship. I looked down at Jasmine, feeling absolutely no pity for the spoiled woman who had eagerly unbuttoned my blouse just a few days ago. I lowered the microphone slightly and locked eyes with her, leaning forward so she could hear every single word clearly over the angry murmurs of the crowd. "I did not have to make anything up, Jasmine," I said, my tone dropping to a deadly serious whisper that still projected through the silent room. "Your parents are bankrupt and your brother is a coward. But the absolute worst part of all of this is the man you chose to marry." I watched Jasmine's eyes dart nervously back to Spencer, who had now bumped into a waiter in his desperate attempt to retreat toward the exit doors. I gripped the microphone tighter, preparing to drop the absolute heaviest payload of the entire night. "You love your husband, Jasmine?" I asked, letting the chilling question hang in the heavy air. "Let us see if you still defend him after this." I turned back to the crystal podium and tapped the right arrow key on my laptop. The projector screen behind me shifted instantly from the horrific video of the assault to a stark, highly organized spreadsheet. The blinding white background was filled with rows of dates, routing numbers, and massive dollar amounts, highlighted in bright red. The crowd squinted, trying to make sense of the complex financial data suddenly looming over them. I took a deep breath, letting my professional training take complete control. "If you direct your attention to the left column," I announced, my voice echoing with clinical precision, "you will see the official routing numbers for the Maryland Community Church Charity Fund. The same fund that many of you in this room generously contribute to every single month. The same fund that Yvonne and Calvin Whitfield claim to champion. Now, if you look at the right column, you will see a corresponding series of offshore wire transfers directed to a dummy corporation registered in the Cayman Islands." A low murmur of confusion rippled through the ballroom. I spotted the senior pastor pushing his way to the front of the crowd, his face pale and his eyes fixed on the massive numbers displayed on the screen. "Let us look at the dates." I continued pacing slowly across the stage. "Last November, the church hosted a massive Thanksgiving fundraiser to build a brand new youth center. You raised $300,000. According to these federal banking records, exactly 48 hours after that fundraiser concluded, $300,000 was wired from the church holding account directly into the Cayman Shell Company. In April, you raised $400,000 for the Single Mothers Housing Initiative. A week later, that exact amount vanished into the exact same offshore account." The murmurs in the crowd began to escalate into genuine angry shouts. People were pointing at the screen, reading the dates, and realizing the timeline matched their community charity drives perfectly. "Who owns the Cayman account?" the senior pastor yelled out, his voice shaking with absolute heartbreak and fury. "Who took our money, Alicia?" I stopped pacing and looked directly down at Spencer. He was frozen near the grand entrance doors, completely surrounded by angry, wealthy guests who were now glaring at him. I raised my hand and pointed my index finger straight at his chest. "The Cayman Shell Company is registered to an encrypted digital wallet," I explained loudly, ensuring every single person heard me. "But criminals always make mistakes." When Spencer touched my federal laptop on Sunday, attempting to use my face to bypass a biometric firewall, my system automatically logged his device's unique media access control address. When he entered my apartment to blackmail me a few days later, he foolishly connected to my network. That allowed me to trace his external internet protocol address directly to his personal crypto trading accounts. I clicked the next slide. It showed a side-by-side comparison of Spencer's digital footprint, matching the exact login credentials of the Cayman bank account. It was airtight, undeniable forensic proof. "Your white son-in-law stole $2 million from the black community," I declared, my voice ringing with absolute righteous fury. "He used the pristine Whitfield family name as a shield to gain the trust of the church elders. He siphoned the charity funds into an offshore account and then funneled the money into highly volatile, decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges. He played the role of a brilliant tech investor, but his trading history shows he was reckless and incompetent. He thought he could day trade his way to a massive fortune and quietly put the principal back before the annual church audit. But the crypto market corrected, and his highly leveraged positions were completely wiped out by automated margin calls. I paused, letting the absolute silence of the room amplify my next words. I accessed his final digital wallet using the back doors left open by his sloppy network security. The current balance of the community charity fund is zero. The youth center money, the single mother's housing fund, the scholarship endowments, all of it is completely gone, liquidated to cover his pathetic gambling debts. The ballroom exploded. It was not just murmurs anymore, it was absolute chaos. The church elders in the front row erupted in pure fury, shouting and cursing at the stage. Several large deacons from the congregation turned around and began marching directly toward the back of the room, where Spencer was desperately trying to push his way through the heavy oak doors. Two wealthy real estate investors physically blocked his path, shoving him backward into the crowd. "You are not going anywhere, you thief," one of the investors shouted, grabbing Spencer by the lapels of his expensive linen suit. Jasmine was standing in the center of the crowd, screaming hysterically, pulling at her own hair as she realized her husband was not just a cheat, but a massive federal thief who had destroyed her life. She looked around at the angry faces of the people she used to look down upon, realizing she was now the ultimate outcast. Yvonne slid down the back wall of the stage, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of gold sequins. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing loudly as the high society she loved turned into an angry mob calling for her family to be arrested. Calvin was leaning over the crystal podium, gasping for air, looking like he was about to have a massive heart attack right there on the stage. Their 35-year legacy was completely obliterated. They were ruined financially, socially, and legally. I had burned their entire house of cards to the ground and salted the earth left behind. I stood there watching the absolute destruction I had orchestrated, feeling a deep, profound sense of justice. Every single insult, every condescending remark, and every moment of gaslighting had led them exactly to this point. But in my moment of triumph, I had briefly forgotten about the most dangerous person in the room. Malcolm had been standing frozen near the edge of the stage, but the sheer reality of his total public annihilation finally snapped the last remaining thread of his sanity. The golden child who had just lost his entire inheritance, his pristine reputation, and his arrogant future in a matter of minutes, could not handle the absolute truth. He let out a sound that did not even sound human. It was a guttural, roaring scream of a pure narcissist who had just been completely stripped of his power, unmasked, and humiliated beyond any possible repair. I turned my head just in time to see his eyes roll back with blind fury, his face contorted into a mask of pure murderous rage. The charming, successful real estate heir was gone entirely, replaced by a violent, desperate animal cornered in his own home. "You ruined my life, you pathetic liar!" He roared, his voice tearing through his throat, echoing violently over the chaos of the ballroom. Before I could even step back to protect myself, Malcolm lowered his broad shoulders and lunged across the wooden stage, sprinting directly at me with his fists raised, ready to attack. He covered the distance between us in a fraction of a second, his heavy footsteps thudding violently against the polished wooden floorboards. His hands were curled into tight fists, and his teeth were bared in a snarl of absolute animalistic rage. I did not flinch or take a single step backward. I did not scream for help. I simply stood my ground behind the clear crystal podium, watching the complete and utter destruction of his fake gentleman persona happening in real time. Just as his hands reached out to violently grab my throat, two large men wearing crisp white tuxedo jackets stepped swiftly out from the dark shadows of the heavy velvet stage curtains. They were definitely not part of the catering staff. I had hired them from a highly exclusive private elite security firm 3 days ago, using my own personal funds to ensure my absolute physical safety tonight. The first undercover bodyguard intercepted Malcolm mid-stride, hitting him squarely in the chest with the unstoppable force of a speeding truck. The air rushed out of Malcolm's lungs in a loud, sickening gasp that echoed through the microphone still resting on the podium. The second undercover bodyguard grabbed his flailing, aggressive arms, twisting them expertly behind his back and slamming his entire body face first into the hard wooden stage. The physical impact echoed like a heavy gunshot through the silent ballroom. Malcolm let out a muffled, agonizing groan as the heavy combat boot of the highly trained security guard pressed firmly between his shoulder blades, pinning him completely and hopelessly to the floor. The wealthy guests gathered around the stage shrieked loudly and scrambled backward, absolutely terrified of the sudden physical violence erupting right in front of their eyes. Jasmine was sobbing uncontrollably now, watching her perfect, wealthy older brother get physically neutralized and humiliated like a common street thug. Calvin tried to step forward to help his son, his face flushed red with panicked anger, but one incredibly sharp warning glare from the second bodyguard made the old patriarch freeze instantly in his tracks. He raised his shaking hands in the air, surrendering completely to the terrifying reality of the situation. Then another distinct sound cut clearly through the frantic noise of the panicked high society crowd. It started as a faint, high-pitched wail in the far distance, but it grew rapidly louder and much more intense with every passing second. Sirens. Multiple heavy federal sirens wailing loudly through the quiet, exclusive tree-lined streets of the wealthy Bowie neighborhood. Bright flashing red and blue emergency lights began to reflect wildly through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the grand ballroom, casting eerie dancing shadows across the terrified, shocked faces of the Maryland elite. The heavy oak double doors of the grand foyer were suddenly kicked open with such extreme physical force that they slammed violently against the expensive marble walls, cracking the plaster. A dozen heavily armed federal agents, wearing dark tactical jackets with the bright yellow letters FBI printed boldly across their chests, marched aggressively into the mansion. They moved with absolute military precision, completely ignoring the lavish white orchid floral arrangements and the fleeing wealthy guests, who were screaming in absolute terror. At the very front of the tactical federal formation was Regional Director Thomas, the exact senior government official I had emailed my encrypted digital dossier to earlier this week. He held a thick stack of manila folders in his hand, looking absolutely furious and ready to tear the Whitfield family apart. Federal agents secure the entire perimeter, he commanded, his deep voice booming with undeniable legal authority. Nobody leaves this building tonight until we verify all identities and secure the physical evidence. The grand ballroom descended into a state of absolute panicked lockdown. Wealthy socialites and powerful state politicians cowered near the walls, afraid of being associated with this massive criminal takedown. Two tactical federal agents immediately spotted Spencer, who was desperately trying to crawl on his hands and knees behind the massive swan ice sculpture to escape through the catering kitchen doors. They grabbed him aggressively by the collar of his expensive white linen suit, dragging him effortlessly across the polished marble floor. Spencer was crying loudly now, actual tears of pathetic terror streaming down his pale face as the agents forcefully slammed him against the wall and snapped heavy cold steel handcuffs tightly onto his wrists. You are under federal arrest for massive wire fraud and the grand embezzlement of $2 million from a charitable religious organization. The arresting agent recited loudly, ensuring the entire church congregation standing nearby heard every single word of his crimes. On the stage, Director Thomas marched directly up the velvet-covered stairs. He looked down at Calvin, who was trembling so violently he could barely keep himself standing upright. Calvin Whitfield, you are under federal arrest for systemic corporate fraud, bank extortion, and criminal conspiracy to conceal $5 million in phantom real estate assets, the director announced, pulling a pair of heavy handcuffs from his tactical belt. Hold your hands out right now and do not make any sudden movements. Calvin slowly extended his shaking, aged hands, letting the cold steel lock securely around his wrists. The great arrogant patriarch of the Whitfield Empire, the man who had aggressively ordered me to sign my life away just an hour ago, was now completely powerless. He looked exactly like a broken, pathetic old man who had finally run out of lies to tell. Down on the ballroom floor, Yvonne watched helplessly as her husband and her son-in-law were shackled like highly dangerous criminals. The absolute psychological horror of her new reality finally caused her physical body to shut down entirely. She let out a weak, gasping wheeze and grabbed the front of her expensive gold-sequined designer dress. She collapsed onto her knees, clutching her chest as a massive, severe panic attack consumed her lungs. She fell sideways onto the cold, hard marble floor, gasping desperately for air, while her former high society friends literally stepped over her body to get out of the way of the advancing federal agents. I calmly closed my heavy federal laptop, safely securing the undeniable digital evidence, and slipped it back into its reinforced black carrying case. I picked up my black leather clutch and walked slowly around the edge of the clear crystal podium. I walked directly toward the edge of the wooden stage, where Malcolm was still pinned aggressively face down against the floorboards, breathing heavily and struggling helplessly against the boots of the private bodyguards. I descended the first velvet step, and then the second, moving with absolute deliberate grace and undeniable power. I stopped at the very bottom edge of the stage, looking down at the broken man who had promised to ruin my career and my life. I planted my foot firmly on the wood, my sharp black stiletto heel coming to a complete stop, just exactly 1 single inch away from his sweating, humiliated, and terrified face. Malcolm rolled his dark eyes upward, struggling desperately to look at me from his pathetic, humiliating position on the floor. His handsome face was pressed hard against the rough wood, his cheek rapidly bruising and slick with nervous sweat. He looked absolutely terrified of me now. The arrogant, entitled golden child of the Maryland elite was finally gone forever, and all that remained was a cowardly criminal realizing his entire life was completely over. "You told me I was always 1 step behind you, Malcolm," I said, my voice incredibly soft but carrying a sharp, undeniable finality that cut through the noise of the ballroom. "You told me I was just a paranoid working-class girl who needed to learn how to quietly fit into your incredibly elite superior world. But you forgot one very important detail about senior federal forensic accountants. We do not just look at the simple numbers on a page. We look deeply at the absolute hidden truth that arrogant, greedy people like you try so desperately to hide. You really thought you could use my successful career as a weapon against me, but my career is exactly the thing that built my impenetrable armor." I leaned down slightly, my voice dropping to a cold, chilling whisper meant only for his ears to hear over the wailing sirens outside. "The next time you want to drug an innocent woman and orchestrate her absolute public humiliation, you should probably make sure she is not wearing a high-definition federal recording device sewn directly onto her collar. Enjoy your long stay in federal prison, sweetheart. I hear the guards there do not serve vintage champagne and caviar in the cafeteria." I stood up straight, adjusting my crimson silk gown, and gave a brief, respectful nod to Director Thomas. He nodded back professionally, signaling his tactical agents to drag Malcolm up from the wooden floor and haul him aggressively out the heavy front doors. I walked out of the Whitfield mansion that night, with my head held completely high, stepping calmly past the flashing red and blue lights of the dozens of police cruisers blocking the driveway. I breathed in the cool, fresh night air, and I did not look back at that house of horrors, even once. Fast forward exactly 6 months into the future. The mighty, untouchable Whitfield real estate empire completely dissolved into thin air. Without the fake collateral and the manipulated federal audits, the major commercial banks immediately called in all their massive outstanding debts. The beautiful, sprawling mansion in Bowie, Maryland, was aggressively foreclosed on by the federal government to pay restitution. The heavy wrought iron gates were padlocked securely shut, and the once perfectly manicured green lawn turned completely brown, overgrown, and utterly abandoned. The federal justice system moved swiftly and without any shred of mercy for their elite status. Spencer was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for embezzling the church charity fund and orchestrating the complex wire fraud. Jasmine filed for divorce, immediately trying to save her own skin, but the entire Black elite community completely ostracized her. Leaving her completely broke and friendless, she was forced to move into a tiny rented room across the state, working a minimum wage retail job just to survive. Calvin and Malcolm were both aggressively convicted on multiple federal felony counts of corporate fraud, financial extortion, and criminal conspiracy. They are both currently serving 15-year consecutive sentences in a highly restrictive maximum security facility far away from their beloved country clubs and luxury cars. As for Yvonne, her absolute worst nightmare came completely true in the most poetic way possible. Stripped legally of all her hidden wealth, her stolen properties, and her precious, untouchable social standing, she was forced by financial ruin to move into a tiny, rundown apartment in the very same working-class neighborhood she used to aggressively mock me for growing up in. Nobody from her elite Maryland social circle ever takes her phone calls anymore, and she is entirely forgotten by the society she worshipped. And as for me, I am absolutely thriving beyond my wildest dreams. I took the massive public exposure and professional credibility from the Whitfield criminal takedown and used it to finally launch my very own independent forensic accounting firm. I now have a beautiful, massive corner office in downtown Washington overlooking the bright city skyline. I dictate my own working hours. I strictly choose my own high-profile corporate clients, and I never have to answer to anyone ever again. I took the absolute worst traumatic experience of my entire life and forged it into an unstoppable financial empire of my own making. I finally found the absolute peace, freedom, and success I had worked my entire life to achieve, and nobody will ever be able to take that away from me. Never let anyone maliciously blame your physical exhaustion when they are the exact ones secretly handing you the spiked drink. Gaslighting is an incredibly powerful psychological weapon used by highly toxic people to make you constantly question your own brilliant intuition and your own sanity. But the absolute truth will always leave a digital footprint if you are brave enough and smart enough to look for it. Have you ever trusted someone completely who eventually turned out to be your absolute worst enemy in disguise? How did you finally figure out their complex lies and take your personal power back from them? Tell me your incredible story in the comments section below. And if you truly enjoyed watching this toxic, arrogant family get exactly what they deserved, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of survival, justice, and absolute undeniable revenge.